After 28 long years of waiting, something glorious has happened. Beholders have finally come to Magic the Gathering as a creature type. And not only that, but we're also getting an insanely powerful legendary beholder that is the equivalent of a mob boss.
Magic. I am a wizard! History. I'm an old wizard! The magic historian. My bones hurt.
Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles. My friends, I hope the day finds you well. We are here today to discuss Xanathar Guild Kingpin and Beholders as a whole in terms of Magic the Gathering. Because up until now, we have had no Beholders in Magic, which may feel like a bit of a head scratcher for people who aren't really familiar with why Wizards of the Coast chose to keep particular creatures out of Magic the Gathering. Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons are both properties owned by Wizards of the Coast. They're both fantasy properties with an incredible amount of overlap. There is virtually nothing that exists in one or the other that couldn't show up on the other side, right? Anything from Magic could easily make its way into D&D, and anything from D&D could easily make its way into Magic. And that's actually what Wizards considered a problem back in the day. So they decided they wanted to keep their intellectual property separated. And the easiest way to do that was to pick iconic creature types associated with Dungeons and Dragons and keep them specifically just for Dungeons and Dragons. So Mind Flayers, the Tarrasque, Beholders, there's a big list of them. Gelatinous Cube, you know what I mean? These are creatures that when you say them, you instantly think Dungeons and Dragons, but not anymore. Now we finally get them as Magic cards. And I have to say, I'm super stoked about it because up until now, in terms of Beholders, we've only had Pseudo-beholders. And that's cards that some people were like, yo, that's a beholder. And other people were like, yo, these don't really count as beholders. And I honestly fall into the latter category. My feelings were the two evil eyes that existed in Magic the Gathering have never been beholders. And actually, I want to take a quick look at them to show you the closest thing we've had to beholders. Since I'm the Magic historian, why not a little bit of history? So, Evil Eye of Orms-by-Gore. This is from Legends. We're talking all the way back in 1994. So 1 black and 4 for a 3/6 Evil Eye. None of your creatures can attack except for Evil Eyes. Evil Eye can only be blocked by walls. The Highway of Fear is the shortest route to defeat. And you can see it's clearly just a singular eye, looking pretty baleful, I'll be real. It's a pretty intense eye, but overall, this card is garbage. 5 mana for a 3/6 that makes it so your creatures can't attack except for it, and oh, if you have more copies of it, woohoo! And can only be blocked by walls. Like, this is hot garbage. That was the first Evil Eye we got. Now, the second one does look more Beholder-esque, but you'll notice it is missing eye stalks. This one, I find it more forgivable if people are like, yo, this looks like a beholder to me. Because I get it. It evokes the mentality of a beholder without actually being a beholder. And it certainly looks more intense than the previous Evil Eye we looked at. So this is the Evil Eye of Urborg. And it works very similarly. It's 1 black and 4. Now, the stats have been reversed. So instead of being a 3/6, this one's a 6/3. And it says non-eye creatures you control can't attack. And also, just so you know, the previous card we looked at was also updated to say the same thing. So these two eyes work in conjunction. Whenever Evil Eye of Urborg becomes blocked by a creature, destroy that creature. So it keeps that same sort of, it's got particular rules around blocking concept. So you can see that there are parallels between these two, right? And the flavor text is pretty amusing. Adalis, what is that thing? We should have stayed in Yavimaya, right? So this is the closest that we've ever had to beholders up until now. But like I said, pale shadows, not worth our time. Let's move on back to the Xanathar Guild Kingpin. So, this is a very powerful card. 1 black, 1 blue, and 4 for a 5/6 beholder. At the beginning of your upkeep, choose target opponent. Until end of turn, that player can't cast spells. You may look at the top card of their library anytime. You may play the top card of their library, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast spells this way. This is absolutely nuts to me. Now, obviously, if you're playing Commander, its power isn't quite as limited, but I'm viewing it from the perspective of a one-on-one game, where you completely shut down your opponent. During your turn, they can't do anything. They can't counter what you're doing. They can't play instants to mess with your permanents. They can't do any of that. They can just sit back while you rifle off the top of their deck going, let's see, oh, I like that, let's play that. Let's see, oh, I like that, let's play that. With no restrictions in terms of the mana cost. This card is really, really cool. It actually feels like a combination of a couple of different older Magic cards. It feels like kind of the child of Sense Triplet and like a Future Sight card. So we've got Sense Triplet, which is 1 black, 1 blue, 1 white, and 2 for a 3/3. At the beginning of your upkeep, choose target opponent. This turn, that player can't play spells or activated abilities, and plays with his or her hand revealed. You can play cards from that player's hand this turn. So again, this is another one where you choose an opponent, you shut them down, you go, no, you're not casting spells, but you get to maraud through their hand, which actually feels a lot more limited. The Xanathar lets you feed off the top of the deck, so there will always be something for Xanathar to feed on. Whereas with Sense Triplets, as long as your opponent's casting their spells on their turn and emptying their hand, really this just turns into a card that says, during your turn, your opponent can't cast spells or activate abilities, which is not an ability to sneeze at. That is a very strong ability, but it doesn't feel as endlessly useful as Xanathar's ability, because you can just keep going off the top cards of their deck. And even if you run into something that causes a problem on the top of the deck you don't want to play, you're playing black-blue. You can just mill it away or wait one turn for your opponent to draw. Like, you can use the Xanathar's ability to control your opponent's draws to a degree as well, which is really strong. So you've got that aspect of Sense Triplets, right? And I said it combines with a card Future Sight, and that's this card right here. It's 3 blue and 2 for an enchantment. Play with the top card of your library revealed. You may play the top card of your library as if it was in your hand. Now, obviously, this is a different variation where instead it's the top card of your opponent's library that's essentially revealed, but just to you. Your opponent doesn't get to see it, and you're playing off your opponent's deck. And I actually really, for a moment, I just want to say, I really like this concept of Future Sight, where Ixidor is seeing different versions of like, oh, take a look at the future. Here's what's going on. I'm going to create a perfect future. That's just a neat card from Magic's history. But either way, Triplets and Future Sight together kind of combine to create this Xanathar feel. And ultimately, like I said, this is a very powerful ability. Not only are you going to be able to know what's on top of your deck, I should say your opponent's deck, play anything you want off your opponent's deck, but whatever is least damaging to you, you can leave on top of their deck. You can, if you have enough mana, you can just play every spell that comes up on the top of their deck and just leave them with land drops every turn. So if you ever played Magic back in the day, people used to stack their deck 2-card land, 2-card land, 2-card land, and if you could get a millstone going, you could just mill 2 cards off their deck every turn, and they would just draw a land every turn. And it's a frustrating lock to be in, but the Xanathar works even better because it doesn't rely on a particular pattern. It just allows you to look at the top card of your opponent's deck. So you can combine this with a number of different effects, but it's really powerful all on its own. And the way this works makes perfect sense from a flavor standpoint, because Xanathar, the guild kingpin, he's actually basically, like I said, the equivalent of a mob boss. Beholders are interesting beings that like to kind of do things behind the shadows, right? They like to be the power behind the throne, as it were. So Xanathar actually started out running a criminal organization of his own and then expanded ever upwards into like basically, okay, now I'm going to absorb up this thieves guild and whatever. So it's this kind of step-by-step consolidation of power in the most awful way. Like, beholders tend to only care about themselves. And I don't even mean beholders as a species. I mean an individual beholder only cares about itself and beholders that are incredibly similar to it. And even those beholders, it tends not to trust. Like if you look in the artwork, you can actually see in the background, in the one giant tank on the right hand side of the artwork, that there is a beholder that is suspended in there. And I imagine that beholder is not alive, because beholders tend not to let other beholders survive. They're worried about having their territory taken from them. So beholders will essentially build up, especially the Xanathar, build up this giant criminal network. Now, I do take a little bit of issue with the way that the artwork is displayed here, because Xanathar is a behind the scenes, like, don't let people know I exist. He's only really going to deal with like 1 or 2 minions at most, and then those minions would go ahead and talk to everybody else. The same way that the mob works, where at the top level you have the one main guy, and he makes all the decisions pretty much. He's in charge of the whole operation, but at the same time, there are limited points of contact to him. A few really trusted people, and then that way the amount of risk to the leader is low. It's really hard to get to him, to figure out who he is, to pin any crimes on him, and that's how the Beholder Xanathar works, okay? That is his mode of operation. I go more into it in the lore video, but he wouldn't be in this room with all these people like lounging around and haggling over treasure, right? You can see 2 people kind of lounging around in the front like this is just some place to chill and have a smoke. You can see that it looks like there's like a goblin and another individual maybe haggling over a piece of treasure or looking at some new acquisition. Maybe the goblin is bringing in something they found defense, and the other person's taking a look at it to kind of evaluate what it's worth. And then there's like a giant enforcer in the background. And then there's more people. There's too many people in this room, right? But I get the idea they're going for. Xanathar is the leader of a thieves guild. He's got this like opulent room. You can see that the entire room has like red, rich looking carpeting, which that color kind of conveys the idea of royalty. The fish bowls that are shown there in the front, first of all, Xanathar has a pet goldfish. He's not actually aware of how long these fish live, so the goldfish has to be replaced covertly by his minions on occasion, or he'll go berserk. It's basically Xanathar cares about himself and his fish and his treasure. Nobody else. In fact, his fishbowl is worth an insane amount of money. It's 2 different fishbowls. They're made like with real genuine treasure. I go into that in the lore video anyway, so I won't go on over long about it. But you can see this is a display of wealth, and I like the concept that as the leader of the Thieves Guild, he can just endlessly rifle through your possessions. All the cards on top of your deck, boom, boom, boom. Everything is open to the Xanathar because he has a guild. He has multiple organizations that have been welded together into a massive, powerful shadow organization, right? And as a result, it doesn't matter what colors you're playing. He has access to everything. He has minions, operatives, whatever you want to call them, that can make almost anything work. And I like that as a flavor concept. It really does tie well into the idea. Now, if you didn't know, beholders have a ton of different magical weaponry built into them, all right? So, they have all these different eye stalks, and every different eye stalk will have different abilities. One could be paralysis, one could be disintegration. So the Xanathar has a whole range of different powers, and I actually go into the powers of every single eye stalk in that lore video as well. So if you want more in-depth like descriptions of all of his powers, we can definitely talk about that on my other channel. Now, I do have another nitpick with the artwork and the flavor of the card overall, and that is that beholders fly. They have levitation style abilities. So this not having flying is actually a big flavor fail. I mean, I understand maybe they didn't want to give it flying because of the power level. They didn't want to make it too powerful, but it ultimately is a flavor fail. But I mean, look at him. Like, what is the beholder on? He's just like, boom. I'm just sitting on a table. Do you know what I mean? That's not how it works. Beholders fly. So he wouldn't be comfortable being just down under this closed arch ceiling. There would have to be a hole directly above him for him to jettison and fly straight upwards into. But whatever. Overall, this is well done artwork. And for people who aren't really familiar with the way that beholders work, this is going to transmit a concept pretty well and not really be too cumbersome in terms of the little nitpicks for flavor. Now, there's one other thing I want to point out from the artwork, and that is on the right-hand side, there's a Mind Flayer and an Intellect Devourer. And we actually have another card based on that, Devour Intellect, where we get a closer view at the Intellect Devourer. And it is exactly what it looks like to you. The Intellect Devourer is a brain with these little knobby arms and legs with claws at the end of them. Essentially, Mind Flayers will use their tentacles to drive into a humanoid's brain, pull their brain out of their head, and then using vile rituals, if they don't consume the brain for their own sustenance or other purposes, then they turn it into one of these Intellect Devourers. And these Intellect Devourers roam around Mind Flayer bases protecting. They eat into your brain. Like, that's what they do. They literally devour your intellect, can actually consume the physical matter of someone's brain, and then climb inside their body and take it over, which is a really cool concept. So, Devour Intellect is a 1 black sorcery. Target opponent discards a card. If mana from a treasure was spent to cast this spell, instead that player reveals their hand, you choose a non-land card from it, then that player discards that card. Imagine having one of these pawing through your thoughts, just eating your thoughts, eventually to eat your brain too. That's intense. The flavor text says, "I'll know what you know soon enough." And that's Neilor, Xanathar Guild Spymaster. And that would be who we saw in the previous artwork. So I love that there's this little touch mentioning the Xanathar Guild as well here. So that wraps up everything I wanted to talk about today. Big shout out to all of my patrons. Thank you very much for supporting my channel. If you liked the video, then like the video because YouTube likes that. And other than that, a link to the Xanathar lore video if you'd like to know more. See you later, my friends.